Okay, we're on chapter two. We're not going to do the whole chapter this week. We'll do half the chapter this week and half the chapter next week. It's a long, long chapter. It's 179. It's 179 slides. So we'll do half of it this week and half of it next week. This has to do with heredity, environment, and psychoactive drugs. So we're going to talk about how drugs get into your system and how they affect this system. We'll talk about neurotransmitters and the nervous system and how addiction actually works. Psychoactive drugs are substances that directly affect affect the central nervous system. The method that a drug gets into the brain are called pharmacokinetics, which literally means drug movement. Pharma means drug, and kinetics means movement. So it's pharmacokinetics means drug movement. Pharmacokinetics deals with the absorption of the substance into your system, how it's distributed, how it's metabolized by your system trying to get rid of it, and eventually how it's eliminated. Pharmacokinetics has to do with the route of administration. In this case, she's burning opium and she's sucking it up into her lungs. The speed of transit to the brain, how fast does it get to the brain? This is really important because some people are looking for instant gratification, instant euphoria, and some things actually send drugs directly into your brain. The affinity for nerve cells and neurotransmitters. What neurotransmitters does it affect? When a psychoactive drug can get to its target in the central nervous system rapidly, the more addictive it tends to be. And of course, this is how nicotine works. This is why nicotine is so highly addictive. It's also how crack cocaine works, and that is also highly addictive. One of the best ways to get drugs into your system is by inhaling it. If you can suck it down into your lungs, it has lots of blood vessels to uh, transport it into your brain, into your blood supply, and into your brain. When a person smokes a psychoactive substance or draws it in as a vapor, as with nitrous oxide or inhaling an active chemical solvent, colloquially referred to as huffing, the drug enters the individual's lungs, as I said before. The drug is rapidly absorbed through the capillary lining of the alveoli of the bronchi. And as you can see, these two kids are huffing using the bags. They put the whatever's in there, they put it in there, and then they draw it down into their lungs, and it goes directly into their system. The psychoactive substance travels through the body with the blood and is pumped to the brain and the tissues of the body and may reach the brain in as short as 7 to 10 seconds. And this is one of the reasons why people huff. Inhaling is the most rapid method of getting a psychoactive substance into the system. So this is a good way to do it if it's something that is a vapor, or that's why vaping, of course, is so dangerous. Individuals were able to control levels and reactions of the psychoactive substance known as titration by regulating the frequency of use and the depth of inhalation. And if you watch people smoke cigarettes, what they're actually doing is titrating nicotine in their system. So what they will do is they will smoke the cigarette. They'll take a puff of the cigarette and then they'll just hold it for a number of seconds or minutes until they'll take another puff. Why aren't they smoking the cigarette on a continual basis? For one thing, it would make them sick. What they're doing is they're titrating the amount of nicotine into their system. And of course, this is a silly picture of a man smoking a lot of cigarettes all at once. I don't know why he would do that, but everybody seems to be interested. Since smoking is an inefficient means of administering psychoactive properties of marijuana, and what you're looking for when you smoke marijuana is THC, of course, tetrahydrocannabinol. 60% of the substance is lost. Pharmaceutical companies are working on aerosol and nasal sprays to deliver the THC, and this is done through the two drugs that they have developed are Marinol and Dronabinol. This method would also eliminate the tars and other toxic substances that make marijuana carcinogenic. So if we're really talking about medical marijuana, there are a lot of better ways of administering the medicinal aspects of marijuana than smoking. Smoking is probably is close to the worst way to get this stuff into your system. There are much better ways. Injecting. Injecting is where the individual introduces a psychoactive substance into the body by using a hypodermic needle and a syringe. There are three methods of injecting appropriate psychoactive substances in the body. Intravenous, into the vein, colloquially known as slamming. This is where the psychoactive substance is injected directly into the bloodstream. This method delivers the psychoactive substance from the bloodstream into the brain in about 15 to 30 seconds. And if we remember, inhaling took 5 to 10 seconds. This takes 15 to 30 seconds. This method is the most likely to create a head rush, an intense feeling of excitation, and mental electricity. Intramuscular, into the muscle, colloquially referred to as muscling. The psychoactive substance is injected directly into the muscle. This method of introducing psychoactive substances through the bloodstream and into the brain takes about 3 to 5 minutes. So this is much, much slower. This method will not create a head rush, but a slower buildup of euphoria. And of course, sometimes people are looking for that. Subcutaneous, under the skin, colloquially referred to as skin popping. The psychoactive substance is injected directly under the skin. This method of introducing psychoactive substances through the bloodstream and into the brain takes about 3 to 5 minutes. This method will not create a head rush, but a slower buildup of euphoria. And as you can see, it causes these really strange circular abscesses. I had a friend who, I'm not really sure what he thought that I thought about these strange scars on his arms, but he was a skin popper. It was fairly obvious to me. Of course, I've seen it before working in medicine and teaching drug use and abuse. This is what it can look like. His wasn't this bad. Actually, his looked a lot like this. He just had circular scarring on his arms, on both of his arms. He was a pretty notorious skin popper, but it can look pretty nasty if that's the way they do it. Injection is the most dangerous method of introducing drugs into the body because once they are entered, there is no turning back. It's all over with. Injecting also introduces the user to a whole host of contaminating infections such as hepatitis B and C, syphilis, and HIV. The individual is also more prone to abscesses and embolisms, blood clots. This is a picture of a guy that's overdosed. He's not really dead. This is not an actual picture. It's a mock-up. You can tell by how pink he is. He's nice and pink. Mucous membrane absorption. Select psychoactive substances that come in a powdered form can be inhaled through the nose and absorbed in the capillaries found in the mucous membrane. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, ground up OxyContin. People will snort these substances and get a high from them. Cocaine is really popular, has been very popular for a while. If you watch the movie, I never can remember the name of this movie. Anyway, it had John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson. He snorted, the lady snorted heroin. She went into cardiac arrest. Eventually, they injected epinephrine directly into her heart, and it started beating again. as weird as that is. This method is much more rapid than oral ingestion and bypasses most of the body's defenses, digestive juices, enzymes, and the liver. Besides snorting through the nose, there are two other methods that you can use. You can put a substance between your cheek and gums, and this, of course, will absorb it through the mucous membrane. This is how, um, uh, what is that stuff? I can't think of it. Oh my goodness, I can't think of it. It's not chewing tobacco, it's snuff. This is how snuff gets into your system. Another way of doing it is putting it under your tongue. And your tongue's kind of interesting because this is how they will give you nitroglycerin. If you have a heart attack, the nitroglycerin will stop the heart attack, as weird as that sounds. It'll also take the pain away. That's the idea. But if you can't swallow the nitroglycerin because the digestive juices will destroy it. So you put it under your tongue, and then it slowly goes into your system. It's known as sublingual. Sublingual means under your tongue. This person has a really tiny tongue. That's really kind of weird. And a lot of fillings. Absorbing drugs through the mucous membrane in the rectum and the vagina are also possible. Geez, I've heard stories and I've seen it happen. One time in the emergency room, we had a whole group of ladies that came in, and they were drunk as skunks, and they were worried because they got drunk really, really fast, and they started to pass out. And nobody really told us what was going on. And then they did they checked them. Somebody got the bright idea of checking to see if there was anything untoward about them. And finally, somebody looked inside or they stripped off their underwear, and here they had tampons stuck not only in their vaginal area that were soaked with alcohol, but into their rectum as well. I don't know how. I have no idea why they would do this. Alcohol, of course, is a drying agent, and it takes away the moisture, and that was part of the problem. They couldn't pull them out. They couldn't pull them out. We were able to get them out, but they couldn't pull them out, and they just kept absorbing all the alcohol. They had soaked these things in vodka, these tampons in vodka, and I guess it was some joke. There were 4 of them. Yeah, there were 4, and it was the 5th one that brought it in, and she was the one that hadn't done this, and so, but she wouldn't tell anybody what was going on. They were sorority sisters. They were all in their 20s. Anyway, it was dumb. This is usually administered as a suppository and can also be used for recreational drugs. You can stick ketamine up there or cocaine. This is a X-ray of somebody who stuck a aerosol can up their rectum. You see some really weird things sometimes, and normally this happens. It always happens on a weekend, and a lot of times it happens when there's a full moon. People get goofy. I'm not going to tell you some of the strange stories. Maybe I will. Anyway, oral ingestion, when a drug is swallowed, it goes through the esophagus into the stomach, passes into the small intestine where it is absorbed by the capillaries in the mucosal lining of the intestine. This method requires between 20 to 30 minutes before the drug begins affecting the brain. That includes the aspirin that you take. If you've got a headache and you take an aspirin and your headache goes away right away, but then you can be assured that that was a tension headache, and just taking the aspirin and knowing that the pain's going to go away makes you less tense, and of course the pain goes away, as not strange as that is. If the psychoactive substance is a beer or other alcoholic beverage, above 10 to 20% of the substance will be metabolized by your stomach. So when you drink alcohol, if you're taking shots or trying to get drunk really fast, it's not going to make any difference. It's going to sit in your stomach. It's not going to drop out of your stomach into the rest of your body. Of course, if you eat food as you're drinking alcohol, this is a good way of absorbing some of that alcohol, and you will not get drunk as rapidly. So if you have something in your stomach that absorbs the alcohol, uh, or if you even if you're drinking on an empty stomach, 10 to 20% of the alcohol will be absorbed by your stomach lining. So if you're drinking something that's 120 proof, then which is fairly strong, a portion of that alcohol isn't going to get into your system right away. It's going to be absorbed by your stomach. It's going to be metabolized by your stomach and broken down so that it's no longer alcohol. Males tend to metabolize alcohol faster than women, and thus they get drunk slower than a woman who consumes the same amount of liquor. And that's usually the way it works, unless she has built up a real high tolerance for alcohol. Most psychoactive substances are fat soluble, and so they move readily across the membranes. Alcohol is both fat and water soluble, so it gets into your system really, really fast. And that's not someplace I would want to vomit. Transdermal absorption. Drugs are now being impregnated on adhesive patches so that the medication can be slowly absorbed through the skin. Some of these patches provide medication for up to 7 days, though it may take as long as 2 days before the therapeutic level of the drug makes it into the system. Because of various factors, psychoactive substances in the blood do not remain in the system for the same length of time. This is known as bioavailability. And of course, this is really important as far as medication is concerned, like my blood pressure medication. If my blood pressure medication didn't stay in my system long enough for 24 hours, one of the problems I would have would be as long as I've had a pill, I'm okay, but then of course, it wears down, and while I'm asleep, my blood pressure would go up, and potentially it would damage my circulatory system. There are various factors that restrict the availability of psychoactive substances to the target tissue after administration. Lots and lots of different factors. Once a psychoactive substance enters the bloodstream, it can be transported inside blood cells in the plasma by attaching itself to protein molecules. And of course, this is all quite important, because depending on what type of medication you're taking, sometimes if it attaches itself to protein molecules, and you're taking another supplement, or you're taking some other medication, they will interfere with each other, and you're not getting the proper dosage of what they think that you're getting. So it's really important for you to tell people what other medications you're taking, especially if they're supplements, because some supplements will interfere with some medications. The psychoactive substance will visit every organ in the body, where it will cause an effect or be ignored. It may be stored, usually in the fat. This is what happens with marijuana. The THC will be absorbed, will be stored in your body fat, and it stays in your system for an extended length of time, up to a month. THC will stay in your system. This makes it kind of interesting, because when you're smoking pot, if I smoke pot this weekend, which I don't do that, but if somebody smoked pot on the weekend, that THC wouldn't leave their system for an extended length of time. So if they've smoked pot on the weekend, and then it came to Wednesday, that marijuana, that THC is still affecting their system. So if they decide to smoke on that day, now actually what they're doing is they're building up the amount of THC in their system. So if somebody smokes a lot of marijuana, smokes it on a relatively frequent basis, they get a buildup in their system, and they actually will seem to be high almost all the time because they will be smoking that much marijuana. It doesn't go away. Alcohol, of course, clears your system fairly rapidly, and you know you're if you're taking shots at midnight, you're only going to stay drunk until about noon the next day because it will clear your system. Marijuana doesn't work that way. Marijuana makes you especially high, and then it starts to break down, of course, but it stays in your system. So if you smoke every day, if you smoke every 24-hour period, it'll actually build up in your system. So it can affect you. It can be ignored. It can be stored. It can be biotransformed. Sometimes they are broken down into chemical variations that may or may not cause psychoactive effects. This is the way Valium works. Valium is fragmented into a lot of different other chemicals, and some of those chemicals actually are sedatives. While the chemical structure of the drug is a factor in distribution, so is the size of the individual. A lighter person with less blood volume will have less blood to dilute the chemical. The blood volume of an adult is 6 to 8 quarts of blood. Now, why in the world is there such a variation between one adult and the next? Women tend to be smaller than men, and they have less blood volume than men do. Children may have 3 to 4 quarts of blood, whereas an adult has twice as much as that. Organs with extensive vascularization will be affected by a drug to a greater degree. This is one of the reasons why cocaine can cause fatal heart reactions. Too much of the drug affects the highly vascularized heart, causing arrest. Humans would have died from bacteria, viruses, and toxins at the beginning of our evolution if it weren't for our ability to keep most of these substances out of our central nervous system. The walls of the capillaries that feed the nervous system consist of tightly sealed epithelial cells that only allow certain substances to penetrate, and this is known as the blood-brain barrier. We need to keep that bad stuff out. Luckily for those who need a chemical assistance on their lucidity, psychotropic medications can cross the blood-brain barrier and change serotonin, GABA, etc., to reduce the symptoms of depression, anxiety, or whatever. The chemicals that people use as psychoactive substances also will cross the blood-brain barrier. Otherwise, they wouldn't be taken since there wouldn't be a brain reaction to these substances. And of course, that's the reason people get drunk. That's the reason people smoke pot. That's the reason they snort cocaine. They're looking for some kind of reaction. And of course, if it didn't cross the blood-brain barrier, they wouldn't have a reaction, and then they wouldn't do it. This is one of the reasons why. Heroin. I've never shot up with heroin, of course, but I'm not sensitive to opiates. Opiates don't do anything to me. If you can shoot me up with morphine, and it's not going to affect me at all. Unfortunately, and of course, I've had surgeries. I was fairly athletic, so a lot of times I would damage myself, and then I would have to go in to be repaired. Like a car that breaks down. Anyway, sometimes I would have surgery, and I'd go in, and they would hit me with something, and it wouldn't deaden the pain. So they would have to hit me with stronger and stronger drugs. I had to use synthetic drugs. So I'm assuming heroin would work on me. It really all depends on the individual. This is Amy Winehouse. I think she's stoned. I'm not really sure. Lots of pictures of Amy Winehouse inebriated. She was notorious for that. The reason psychoactive substances cross the blood-brain barrier is because the brain is very fatty, and most psychoactive substances are fat-soluble or lipophilic. This is especially true of nicotine. This is why nicotine has such an effect on humans. This is also why alcohol has such an effect on humans and why marijuana has such a strong effect on almost all humans. I did have a student one time who couldn't get drunk, and she used to go to the bars and she would bet people that she could drink them under the table, and she drank everybody under the table because she didn't react to alcohol at all. It was really kind of weird. I told her it was dangerous for her to consume alcohol because alcohol, despite the fact it's not making her drunk, it's still having an effect on her organs. And she really needed to stay away from it because she wouldn't know how much damage she was actually doing. People, I mean, being drunk is a good thing because it tells you that you're having a negative reaction to this toxin. This is the table on the left shows you the half-lives of most of the drugs and how long it can be detected in your urine. What what can be detected in your urine the longest is THC in marijuana, 15 to 30 days. And this is because it is stored in your body fat. And as we were talking before, this is not a very good idea. Anyway, to uh, to smoke pot on a daily basis because it is cumulative. Um, Individuals that smoke a lot of pot, they can get the same high from just a small amount, and the reason is because it is they store it in their body fat. Drugs that are completely fat soluble will cross the blood-brain barrier very rapidly. Drugs that are only partially fat soluble will cross the barrier much slower. This is the case with morphine, which crosses the barrier much slower than heroin. This form of crossing the barrier is known as passive transport, and that's one of the reasons that why people use morphine to block pain. Actually, morphine does block pain to some extent, but it makes you forget. Morphine makes you forget, so that's one of the reasons why they give it to you is to make you forget. Now, the weird part, well, I'm not going to go into that. You don't want to hear my horror stories of waking up during surgery. It is a horror story. Active transportation takes place when a water soluble hydrophilic chemical needs to cross the blood brain barrier. A water soluble chemical must first attach itself to a chemical structure that will readily cross the barrier. In the case of cocaine, cocaine hydrochloride attaches itself to protein molecules. Most water soluble substances, such as antibiotics, will not cross the barrier. And this is a good thing. You don't want those antibiotics in your brain. They don't really do you any good. You don't need them up there. You need as little chemicals in your brain as possible. The blood brain barrier does not completely develop until the individual is 1 or 2 years old. This is something to remember. This is the reason why you can't give a child anything with alcohol in it because their blood-brain barrier isn't completely intact yet until they're about 2 years old. Toxic chemicals that will not injure adults cross an infant's barrier and cause brain damage. The placental barrier protects the developing fetus from water-soluble chemicals, but since most psychoactive substances are fat-soluble, the fetus uses whatever the mother uses, including alcohol, including THC, including all of the most of the psychoactive drugs, and including some of the drugs that we give individuals as medications rather than as illegal drugs. And this is one of the reasons why when a woman is pregnant, there are a lot of things that she can't take, and that's because it will cross the placental barrier, the placental barrier, the blood-brain barrier, and it will affect the baby's brain. It will affect their development. It will cause hair lip. It will cause clubfoot. Cause all kinds of interesting, strange, and horrible problems for the baby. So this is one of the reasons why Women should stay away from just about everything while they're pregnant. Why do you get away from this? The body is always trying to rid itself of foreign substances, whether they are harmful or helpful. It does this in two ways. It either metabolizes them or it excretes them. Metabolism is where they process using and inactivating a substance. Most of this, of course, takes place in the liver. That's the liver's job. This is one of the reasons why if you put a lot of toxins in your system, you are potentially damaging your liver. Now, this one of the substances that, of course, is a toxin that a lot of people consume is alcohol. And of course, if you've ever been around an alcoholic, sometimes they will have fatty livers. Sometimes they will have cirrhosis of the liver. And of course, that can cause an early death. Another substance that is fairly destructive to your liver is Tylenol, acetaminophen. This stuff is a toxin, just like alcohol is a toxin, or any poison that you put in your system, and it has to be cleared through the liver. So if you take a lot of Tylenol, it's probably not very good for you. There have been arguments going on about some of the sugar supplements that you can use. I can't think of any right off the top. Aspartame. Aspartame is one. There was for a time they said that aspartame caused kidney cancer or liver cancer, and of course, and this is one of the reasons why you shouldn't drink diet drinks. But of course, there are no studies that show that this is true. Otherwise, they would have taken it off the market. So you can metabolize the toxin, or you can just excrete it. Expelling the foreign substance and its metabolites from the body, this takes place mostly in your kidneys. A good example of this would be vitamin C. Vitamin C, there's a reason why you can't accumulate so much vitamin C in your system that it does you damage, and that's because the body just excretes it. It just gets rid of it. So if you're taking vitamin C supplements and you already are taking in enough vitamin C, don't worry about it because the vitamin C will be excreted by the kidneys. And now you've got really, really rich urine. Anyway, those are the two ways to do it. And this is Lindsay Lohan, of course. When the liver metabolizes alcohol, it breaks it down into water and carbon dioxide. It excretes it from the body through the urinary tract, the sweat, and as vapor from the lungs. As weird as it sounds, working in the emergency room when the drunks come in, you can smell it in their sweat. You can smell the alcohol in their sweat. You can also smell it on their breath. So if you're really sensitive to these smells, you can usually tell how drunk somebody is just by being close to them, from the vapors coming off their sweat and from their lungs, of course. Lindsay Lohan, of course, has had an alcohol problem. So did her mother. As I learned, I'm not really that. I don't study Lindsay Lohan, but I have read stories about Lindsay Lohan, and her mother was a fairly functional alcoholic, and Lindsay Lohan, of course, is having all kinds of interesting problems. She was popular and she was successful early in her career, and then it led to her partying too much and drinking too much, and of course now she has problems, and we don't see her very much anymore. And of course, the question is she a blonde or is she a brunette? I guess it really doesn't matter. The liver breaks Valium into four metabolites that are actually active in themselves and affect the brain. And of course, this has to do with the metabolizing substances. And when we talk about alcohol, we'll talk about how rapidly you can metabolize alcohol. Males, of course, will metabolize alcohol faster than females. So alcohol is actually a lot more dangerous for females than it is for males. Measurement of metabolism or elimination of a chemical is known as its half-life. It takes 6 half-lives to break a chemical down so that it isn't detectable anymore. Cocaine, its half-life is 30 to 60 minutes. it will still be detectable for 3 to 6 hours. Methadone, its half-life is 15 to 60 hours. It's detectable up to 15 days. THC, its half-life is 20 to 30 hours, and it's detectable for 5 to 7.5 days. Prozac, 1 to 6 days. I'm sorry, the half-life is 1 to 6 days, and it'll stay in your system. It will still be detectable for 6 to 36 days. Clearing the system is based on many factors, so none of these figures are absolutes. It really all depends on who you are and what you look like, as weird as that sounds. If you're an old fart like me, age is a factor in metabolism of drugs. After the age of 30, the liver begins producing fewer and fewer enzymes to metabolize select chemicals, such as alcohol and the sedative hypnotic drugs. So your liver becomes less efficient as you get older. So staying away from drugs that you used in the past, probably not a bad idea as you get older. Race has been shown to be a factor in levels and types of enzymes maintained in the liver. Caucasians tend to maintain enzymes used to metabolize alcohol rapidly, while Asians metabolize alcohol slower and with more side effects, quicker drunkenness, and a rapid flushing of the face. It is weird. Caucasians are like professional drinkers. If you think about it, alcohol evolved, um, and drinking alcohol evolved in the Caucasian world. So Caucasians have been drinking for thousands and thousands of years. So the people that weren't able to handle their alcohol, of course, fell out of the gene pool a long, long time ago. So if you are a Caucasian, then potentially you have evolved to drink alcohol and to function with alcohol. This is one of the reasons why. And so if we look at American Indians, of course, American Indians have only had alcohol for the last, 500 years? 600 years? Probably 500 years. So yeah, American Indians are probably more susceptible to the dangers of alcohol. Asians are the same way. They didn't really have alcohol until Europeans came around, went around the went around Africa to reach Asia. So the reality is different races have different sensitivities to alcohol. Heredity factors can affect metabolism. Some people will inherit fewer enzymes. Some people inherit more body fat to store drugs. Some people inherit a high metabolic rate to help eliminate drugs. It's really kind of interesting. Sometimes you'll see drunks who have a big beer belly, and other times you'll see drunks who are just as skinny as a minute, and they both drink the same amount of alcohol. They can drink exactly the same amount. One is a little bitty short skinny guy, and the other is a big guy. But they can both drink the same amount of alcohol. It has to do with their metabolic rate, and of course this is genetic. Health can affect metabolism. Unhealthy people tend to metabolize chemicals slower or less completely. For example, the individual may have severe liver damage due to hepatitis or cirrhosis. If you have a cold, then your metabolism is going to be affected. So if you are sick or if you have a chronic condition, staying away from drugs is not a bad idea. Of course, if you're taking the drugs as part of your medication, that's probably the best bet. But don't mix it with alcohol or pot or anything else, because all you're doing is accelerating your death. An individual's emotional state changes the effects of a drug. Anger or anxiety in a person using methamphetamines may cause episodes of lashing out or violence. And of course, we have seen this over and over and over again. People on methamphetamines or cocaine will kill somebody, and they won't realize that they did that. As weird as that is. The presence of other drugs will delay the metabolism of select drugs. When alcohol is used with Xanax, the Xanax will stay in the body 2 to 3 times longer than normal. This delay of metabolism and exaggeration of effects is called drug synergism. And of course, this is what you have to look for when you are taking a medication. The doctor needs to be aware of all the medications that you're taking, including your illegal drugs. Not everyone's body chemistry is the same. This is why some people are allergic to select drugs and others aren't. I'm not, like I said, I'm not sensitive to opiates. Some people shoot up with heroin all the time, and they just get this great euphoria. Or they'll go in and they'll give them a shot of morphine or Demerol or something, and it will affect them. It doesn't do anything to me. So some people, we all have different body chemistry. Caffeine, I can drink all the caffeine in the world, doesn't affect me, doesn't keep me awake, doesn't do anything to me. Other individuals, they drink coffee and they get wired. I have a brother and a mother. Well, I had a mother who, when she drank coffee, she'd have heart palpitations. So people thought she was having a heart attack. She used to drink coffee all the time. Then, as she got older, she became more and more sensitive to it. My dad, at the same time, who was a couple of years younger than my mom, he used to drink coffee continually. He went in for he was born with a heart defect. One of his valves leaked. So when he went in for open heart surgery to fix this heart valve, they had to take him off of coffee, and everybody's going, "Oh my God, he drinks 2 or 3 pots of coffee a day. How is he going to survive in the hospital?" And he had no problem at all. Caffeine did absolutely nothing to him. He didn't have any withdrawal effects at all. I have a brother that's sensitive to caffeine, just like my mother was. And one time I'm laughing about this. This is kind of sad. One time he was driving to visit his daughter. His daughter was in Norfolk, Virginia. He was living in Anderson, Indiana. And he was halfway in between. He was falling asleep. So he decided that he would buy a bottle of Mountain Dew, one of those 20-ounce bottles of Mountain Dew, and drink it, and maybe that would keep him awake. Well, he had such a reaction to the caffeine in the Mountain Dew that he hallucinated, and he ended up in Maine. And so a couple days later, he didn't visit his daughter, which was just the biggest tragedy in the world, you would have thought. Anyway, he ended up in Maine from Virginia. And if you look at the map, Maine is way up north, and Virginia is directly east of Indiana. So somehow he got on the wrong interstate. Who knows? But he ended up in Maine. As funny as that is. And of course, he calls me on the telephone after this happened, and he says, "Oh, you got to stay away from Mountain Dew. That stuff's poison. It's almost like taking a drug." Of course, at the same time, I was drinking 4 or 5 cans of Mountain Dew a day, and I was having no effects. Of course, otherwise I would have stopped. I'm not silly. I am kind of silly, but I'm not that silly. Anyway, other factors that can affect the metabolism of a psychoactive drug. Your body weight, the bigger you are, the more weight you have to distribute the drug in. Your level of tolerance, if you don't drink alcohol and you suddenly drink a beer, or you suddenly match shots with somebody, you're going to get drunk real fast. So you don't have any level of tolerance. But if it's somebody that's been drinking for an extended length of time, at volumes for an extended length of time, of course, they'll be able to drink without getting drunk. Red Fox, who was a comedian, he was on Chico and the Man was his television show, I think it was. Anyway, Chico and the Man, Red Fox said he knew he was an alcoholic when he drank a fifth of whiskey and didn't feel it. He knew he was an alcoholic after that. Level of tolerance. Women's monthly hormonal cycle. When a woman is premenstrual, during her ovulation, she gets drunk a lot faster. And there are certain times during the month when it's really hard for her to get drunk. And this all has to do with hormones, of course. Enzyme induction, enzyme inhibition, and weather. As you can see, the picture on the left, you've got a storm moving in. Anytime you've got a barometric pressure, which is very low, like what's happening in the picture, this will actually force drugs into your system a lot faster and with a lot stronger effect. So on a sunny day, you may be able to drink a case of beer, but on a day like this, if you tried to, after your 10th or 11th beer, you're drunk as a skunk, and it's because it's forcing the alcohol through your system when the barometric pressure is so low. So if you want to drink a lot, then drink on a sunny day, as compared. And this is one of the reasons why you go out and you mow the lawn and you're hot, so you come in and you drink a couple beers, and it doesn't seem to affect you. You're racing the storm that's moving in, so you mow your lawn as fast as you can, then you come in, you drink a couple beers, you're drunk for the rest of the night. It's just the way it works. In order to understand the effects of that psychoactive substances have on the nervous system in general and the central nervous system in particular, we need to review the various nervous systems that control our bodies. The nervous systems can be divided into two basic parts. The central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal column, and the peripheral nervous system, which is everything but all the nerves in your body, but your brain and your spinal column. The peripheral nervous system collects information, sends it to the central nervous system, which then responds to the stimulus back through the peripheral nervous system. The proper response will be through the appropriate system of the body, and these are the systems of the body: your nervous system, your skeletal system, your endocrine system, your digestive system, your respiratory system, your muscular system, your circulatory system, your urinary system, your lymphatic system, and your integumentary system. Integumentary system is your skin. Okay. Psychoactive drugs may alter information headed for the brain. Painkillers block the chemical that tells the brain that they are in pain. Psychoactive drugs can disrupt messages sent back to the parts of the body when someone is so drunk that their hands and feet don't work properly. They're trying to stick the key in the lock, and they can't quite get it in there. It just isn't working quite right, which is good if that lock happens to be on their car door. They really don't need to drive home. Psychoactive drugs can disrupt thinking, and there you go. That's alcohol again. Some of the goofiest people I've ever talked to were people that were drunk. Sometimes they get angry, sometimes. And the funny thing about people who are drunk, they think that everything they say is the truth. But, that alcohol has nothing to do with the truth. It's not like a truth serum. It's not the way it works. I hope not, because I have a wife who, when she has been drinking, of course she doesn't drink very much anymore, but when she's been drinking, either I'm really handsome, which I'm sure that's true, but I'm either really handsome or I'm the biggest jerk the world has ever created. I'm more often the biggest jerk the world has ever created. So I'm hoping that alcohol doesn't have anything to do with truth. I don't mind her being delusional about my attractiveness, but otherwise I'm in trouble, I guess. Psychoactive drugs may affect an organ when they pass through it, or affect them when the central nervous system sends back a distorted message, as with alcohol again. Evolutionary psychologists speculate that any changes to the human form, including the brain, continued because they assisted the individual in their survival. A good example of this is the human affinity for sugar and fat, which provides a quick and more prolonged energy source. So we have an affinity for fat and sugar. This is because when we were When food was relatively scarce, we ate what would keep us alive. A good example of that is during the Depression, people started cooking differently. They put a lot more fat in their foods. Uh, they started making gravy out of with simple ingredients. It's animal fat, it's flour, and it's milk. That's how you make gravy, and um, and salt and pepper, of course. Uh, but the reason we put when I was growing up, we put gravy on every. I mean, we always had gravy. There was always gravy to eat. And what my dad would do, he would take a slice of bread and he would cover it with gravy, and that's what he would eat that. And of course, my parents grew up during the Depression, so both of them were conditioned to eat as much fat as they possibly could. Of course, this has carried over. Unfortunately, this has carried over. We have lots of food now. We don't have to worry about these things, but people are still doing and eating like they were in the old days. Hamburgers became extremely popular. Hamburger became extremely popular during the Depression, and unfortunately, some hamburger is 30% fat, is 30% animal fat, 30% beef fat, and of course, the reason people are have learned or been conditioned to consume hamburger is because during the Depression, you wanted to get you ate a hamburger and you were good. You took in enough calories for the whole day. Even though it was 30% animal fat, you're still consuming enough calories to get you through the day. Well, we haven't really readjusted ourselves. Some people have, but a lot of people haven't readjusted ourselves. So we're still consuming a lot of fats and sugars. That's why for the longest time there was no diet drinks. The first diet drinks were Tab and Fresca, were the first two diet drinks. For the Yeah, so everybody, if they wanted a Coke, they drank a Coke, and it had all the sugar in it. And of course, the sugared drinks are a lot more popular than the diet drinks. Another example would be the affinity for sexual intercourse for both males and females, which led to offspring which guaranteed their survival of the species. Of course, we look at humans as if we're above all other animals, but the reality is we still have this affinity to reproduce, just like all animals have. Of course, if you have dogs that haven't been fixed, they will at some point they will go out and get themselves or impregnate somebody. If they're a male, of course, they will go out to impregnate a female dog, and if they're a female dog, they will go into heat and try to get pregnant. So all animals have that same affinity, otherwise they wouldn't have survived. Following the evolutionary premise, psychoactive substances must serve some purpose. One reason may be that most psychoactive substances affect our natural survival mechanisms, but initially cause desirable effects. Drinking makes you feel good. Cocaine makes you feel energetic. Heroin relaxes you. All of these things. There is some desirable effect that we're looking for. Eventually, as humans, we may adapt to the effects of these substances, but as for now, these substances are subverting our survival mechanisms, and in many cases, the result is anti-survival. The more you drink, the more likely that you'll die young. The more you smoke, the more likely that you will die young. The more cocaine that you snort, the more likely that you will die young. I mean, all of these substances are anti-survival rather than survival. The human brain not only maintains the largest cerebrum, the new brain of all creatures, but all the structures of the lower animals or the old brain. So if we look at fish or frogs or crocodiles, have a relatively small brain with very little cerebrum, but the higher primates, of course, have much larger brains. As survival became more complex, Higher animal forms develop new brain structures to aid them with survival. The primitive, primal, or old brain consists of the brainstem, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the midbrain, or the mesocortex, and the limbic system. These brain structures can be found from animals as primitive as fish to humans, of course. And this is what a fish's brain looks like. As you can see, there is no cerebrum. It is all primitive brain. The old brain regulates physiological functions. The respiration is maintained through the brainstem. Your heartbeat comes from the brainstem as well. Your body temperature is maintained through the brainstem. Hormone release is controlled through the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and movement is controlled by the cerebellum right here. So this is the primitive brain, and this is the part that controls your respiration, heartbeat, and body temperature. The old brain, the limbic system, is the area that acknowledges the experience of basic emotions and cravings: fear, anger, hunger, thirst, lust, pain, pleasure. That takes place right here in the limbic system. The old brain is the area that imprints survival memories, specifically the limbic system. Most psychoactive substances act on the old brain, causing euphoria in this area and thus providing the euphoric memories that lead to addiction. The emotions of the old brain overpower the reasoning capacity of the cerebrum and lead to the repeated taking of euphoric substances. As hominids advanced over time, more and more brain power was needed to survive. This came to us in the form of the cerebrum and the highly convoluted neocortex. The new brain aids us in solving problems of survival. Most of the time, the new brain controls the old brain. Reasoning trumps emotion. However, when a person uses psychoactive substances, the craving from the old brain may override rational arguments, such as it's too expensive. I mean, usually illegal drugs are fairly expensive. There are bad side effects to it. They're dangerous. They may not just be that the substance, they may be some poison, some toxin mixed in. I have other responsibilities that are more important than my pleasure. And of course, that is taking care of your family is far more important than getting high. The reward reinforcement pathway encourages a human to perform or repeat an action that promotes survival. It is this pathway that is affected by psychoactive substances. Also referred to as the mesolimbic dopaminergic reward pathway, it has a stop switch, which is your orbitofrontal cortex, your reasoning portion of your brain. This is the part that tells you, stop it, you dummy. And the more area is also known as the pleasure center, and it encompasses 4 different structures. The amygdala, which is right here. The lateral hypothalamus. Where are you, lateral hypothalamus? Your hypothalamus, your hypothalamus is right here. Your nucleus accumbens septi, which is right here. And your ventral tegmental area, and it's right back here. This is your reward reinforcement loop. Once it gets in there, it makes you feel good, and the neurotransmitter that it utilizes is dopamine, and that's why it's called the mesolimbic dopaminergic reward pathway, because it is dopamine that tells the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, the lateral hypothalamus, and the ventral tegmental area that you are having a good time. The pleasure center serves 2 purposes. It gives a feeling of satisfaction when a need is fulfilled, or even the anticipation that a need will be fulfilled. It gives us a surge of relief or intense satisfaction when pain is diminished. So pain and pleasure are very close to each other. They actually activate the same area of your brain. Pain activates the area of your brain when it goes away, and pleasure activates that area when it's there. Psychoactive substances activate the pleasure circuit and rewards the individual with a feeling of satisfaction or pain relief. Unfortunately, psychoactive substances overactivate the pleasure center and shut down the stop switch, enabling the individual to feel an intense need to continue use. 3 phases of brain activity with the reward reinforcement pathway. First of all, the anticipation of drug use or compulsive behavior creates craving. Internal or external cues activates the amygdala, which causes a release of dopamine from the ventral tegmental area, which in turn activates the nucleus accumbens, causing craving. For an alcoholic, passing a bar, this is an external cue, of course, would activate the amygdala, causing a release of dopamine from the ventral tegmental area, which would activate the nucleus accumbens, causing a craving for alcohol. For someone who smoked pot with their friends before they went away to school, when they see their friends on spring break, this is an external cue, it would activate the amygdala, causing a release of dopamine from the ventral tegmental area, which would activate the nucleus accumbens, causing a craving for pot. The second phase of the reward reinforcement pathway involves the brain telling the individual to do it again after ingesting the psychoactive substance. With use, the dopamine is released from the ventral tegmental area, which activates the nucleus accumbens to continue the craving. Phase 3 of the reward reinforcement pathway involves the nucleus accumbens signaling the orbitofrontal cortex that it has taken in the substance and asks for a signal of more or satiation. In addicts and abusers, this signal is weakened, as is the reasoning function of the area, resulting in ingestion that does not lead to satisfaction. Psychoactive substances imprint the memory of euphoria or pain relief more deeply than most natural survival memories. The alteration of brain chemistry causes normal activities to be less pleasurable. And of course, if you've ever been around somebody that smokes pot, if they are not smoking pot, everything is boring for them. In other words, they can't feel pleasure anymore. And we see the same thing with people that use MDMA, ecstasy. These individuals, of course, when they take the ecstasy, they get this surge of serotonin. And when they're not on ecstasy, they don't have a capability of feeling pleasure, as weird as that sounds. So in essence, what you're doing if you're using these substances is that you're making yourself not be able to feel pleasure naturally. Now you can only feel pleasure with the drugs. To a methamphetamine addict, the desire for the drug will be more important than her relationship with her children. And you may say to yourself, "Oh, this is impossible. This is impossible." It's possible. I have known cases, and this was actually in Pinyan when there was so much meth going on in Pinyan that individuals were selling their children for another fix. As weird as that sounds. Of course, we've seen it before, not just in Pinyan, certainly, but people prostituting their children so that they could get more methamphetamines. To the compulsive gambler, gambling will become more important to them than food or sex. Psychoactive substances tend to affect the psychological functioning of the body, especially heart rate and respiration. It is the effect on respiration that causes most drug overdose emergencies and death. Psychedelics, LSD, marijuana, and the rave drugs not only affect the old brain, but the new brain as well. These drugs especially affect memory as they activate 2 areas of the brain that help to control memories, the amygdala and the hippocampus. As people age from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, they learn to integrate the drives of the old brain with the reasoning and common sense of the new brain. Developmental problems, childhood traumas such as chaotic or abusive childhoods, compulsive behavior, or psychoactive drug use can circumvent survival mechanisms and lead to irrational behavior or addiction. So unfortunately, of course, this is a common occurrence. These individuals will do silly things or they will become addicted if they have been abused as children. The most important structure of the reward reinforcement pathway is the nucleus accumbens septi. This bundle of nerves is the most powerful reinforcer in the pathway. It is this area of the brain that drives people to action. Research with rats stimulating this area of the brain led to death. They could do nothing else but stimulate this area. When we tried the same thing on human subjects, we found exactly the same thing. Of course, we didn't let them stimulate themselves to death. We'll let a rat do it, but we won't let a human do it. Social factors tend to affect the obsession to use a psychoactive substance. The psychoactive substance alters the brain chemistry to make the individual want to use. This is one reason why only complete abstinence will stop the craving. To begin again will lead to the craving starting at the same intense level. And of course, we've seen this before, people falling off the wagon, and then of course they go whole hog. They are a unrecovered alcoholic or an unrecovered cocaine addict. Brain imaging has shown that brain cells change as addiction develops. While normal memory doesn't take place until an action has been repeated 3 or more times, intense stimulation can cause sensitization with just one encounter. These neural pathways are highly sensitive and may cause relapse in just one additional encounter. And this is one of the reasons why, if you're an alcoholic, you cannot do it again. You can't drink again. You need to stay away forever. You can't become a short-time user. It just doesn't work that way. You got to stay away from it. Why do psychoactive drugs disrupt the on and off switch of the reward reinforcement pathway? One theory is that since they don't originate from an essential body need, the brain has no satiation point established for psychoactive substances. In other words, you don't know when to stop. The second theory is that the on-off switch gets stuck in the on position. The person doesn't realize that the act has been completed. The person will use until they run out of drug or pass out, which is what has happened to this guy. A third theory is that the psychoactive drug creates such euphoria or pain relief that the on-off switch is ignored or overridden by the brain. A fourth theory is that the psychoactive substance disrupts communication between the old and the new brain. Many psychoactive substances incapacitate the thinking and reasoning portion of the new brain, and the individual reverts to old brain instincts or automatic functioning. And I don't remember why I put this in here, but I couldn't figure out how in the world he got in there. The main instrument of the nervous system is the neuron. The neuron is composed of the soma, the axon, and the dendrites. Information comes into the neuron through the dendrites and is distributed to other entities through the terminals at the end of the axon. Each neuron can make contact with one entity up to 150,000. It is estimated that there is between 100 trillion to 500 trillion neuronal connections in the human body. You may have read last week that Apple is now worth $2 trillion. It's the most successful company the world has ever seen. Apple computers and Apple iPhones and whatever. Neurons are different lengths from fractions of millimeters to the sciatic nerve that can be a meter long and runs from your heel to your spinal column. So depending on how long your legs are, that's how long your sciatic nerve is. And you've got one in each leg, of course. Neurons do not touch, but they communicate with one another. They do communicate with one another. This communication takes place in the synaptic cleft, a gap between the two neurons. In order for the two neurons to communicate, a chemical messenger called a neurotransmitter must pass between them. The neurotransmitter is housed in tiny sacs called vesicles. And now we're going to talk about the different types of neurotransmitters. The first one we're going to talk about are monoamines, also known as catecholamines. The first one we're going to talk about is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine was the first neurotransmitter ever discovered. It's the neurotransmitter that activates the muscles, and this is the reason it was discovered first. It also acts as a vasodilator. They found out that it worked on the muscles, and of course, this became extremely important. Then, the more we worked with acetylcholine, the more things we discovered that it did. Works as a vasodilator. It controls mental acuity, memory, and learning. So, acetylcholine, as you can imagine, without acetylcholine, now we got a really serious problem. Not only can you not move, but you can't remember anything. And of course, that is a disease known as Alzheimer's disease, where the acetylcholine producing cells are destroyed, are slowly destroyed, and then the individual can't remember anything. They also can't move, as interesting as that is. So, and I read an article the other day that was saying that if we live long enough, we will all have Alzheimer's disease. In other words, our brains will start diminishing as we get older. If we get into our 80s or 90s, of course, our memory isn't nearly as good. And this is one of the reasons why they're arguing about whether we should elect Donald Trump or Joe Biden. Joe Biden is 77 years old, so he's pretty old fella. Of course, Trump is 74 years old, and he's a pretty old fella as well. So this is, and of course, Trump is going to say those 3 years mean a whole lot, and well, we'll see what happens, of course. But this is going to become an issue in the election because we have two really old fellas that are running for president. And of course, as I said before, acetylcholine was the first neurotransmitter that was discovered. The second neurotransmitters discovered were norepinephrine and epinephrine. Initially, when we discovered them, we thought they were the same chemical. This is, yeah, okay. Norepinephrine and epinephrine act as stimulants when the body needs energy. They control your hunger, they control your attention span, your motivation, your confidence, and your alertness. Epinephrine, of course, gives you the energy. This is what they injected into that character's heart to get her heart start to beat again. I've seen that in the emergency room where they tried everything else. They couldn't get the heart going, so they shot it up with epinephrine, adrenaline, to get it going again. Norepinephrine makes you feel confident and feelings of well-being. So if we can increase your norepinephrine level, we can actually take away your depression. And some antidepressants actually do increase your norepinephrine level. Dopamine regulates your fine motor muscular activity. It represents emotional stability. It tells you when you're satiated. It is the neurotransmitter that functions in the reward reinforcement pathway. Dopamine is the most important neurotransmitter involved in drug use because it has to do with the reward reinforcement pathway, and it is dopamine that tells you when you're feeling good. Reduced dopamine leads to Parkinson's disease. Excess dopamine, especially D2 receptor sites, causes schizophrenia. And this is a painting of a cat. This is a picture of a cat when the individual was not having a psychotic episode. As the episodes got worse, the cat got more and more bizarre. And of course, this is when he was in a full-blown schizophrenic episode. As you can see, the cat changed over time, depending on his mental functioning at the time. Histamine controls the inflammation of tissue and allergic reactions. So if somebody punched you in the arm and you had a swelling there, the reason it would swell up is because of histamine. It regulates emotional behavior and sleep. So histamine is very important to to going to sleep, actually. Serotonin controls mood stability, depression, appetite, sleep. It also has something to do with sexual activity. Sexual activity is actually regulated by testosterone in your hypothalamus. It is serotonin that regulates the testosterone. The males have more serotonin in their brain, and that is to regulate their testosterone level. Depending on what they do, individuals that lift weights and exercise all the time, it increases their testosterone. And of course, some of that testosterone is going to get into their brain. Is that going to make them more sexually active? Well, potentially it would, except, of course, we have serotonin regulating this. And of course, they're not going to go out and lift weights and go out and rape somebody. That would not be something that should happen anyway. And this is one of the reasons why women are more depressed than men. They don't have as much testosterone, and therefore they don't potentially they don't need the serotonin in their brain, so they don't have as much. Mood can be elevated by forcing more serotonin into the synaptic cleft, and of course that's how we treat people with antidepressants. We try to increase their serotonin level. Enkephalins, endorphins, and dynorphins are involved in regulation of pain, relief of stress, immune response, stomach activity, and other physiological functions. It has been speculated that the reason that I do not am as insensitive to as why I am insensitive to opiates. Opiates take the place of endorphins. The speculation is that possibly I don't have, I don't utilize endorphins as a painkiller, as a natural pain regulator. It's not like every time I touch myself, I start screaming in pain. I do have enkephalins and dynorphins in my system, but potentially I don't have as much endorphins. How can they measure that? Well, they really can't, unfortunately, I guess. We won't worry about it. Anyway, immune response, stomach activity, and other physiological functions. That's what the enkephalins, endorphins, and dynorphins do. These are your opioid peptides. Amino acids, gamma-aminobutyric acid is one of the most important neurotransmitters in your brain. It is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter, so it regulates all these stimulating neurotransmitters. It's involved in 25 to 40% of all synapses in the brain. It controls your impulses, your muscle relaxation, and your arousal. It slows down your brain. This is really important because the way that we treat anxiety is by giving you a medication that increases your GABA level. So it actually controls anxiety levels. Alcohol has a strong effect on GABA, and this is one of the reasons why when people drink, their behavior becomes erratic. Some people, when they drink, they become depressed. It's a depressant, of course, so they become depressed. Other individuals will become violent when they drink. When I was in college, I lived on a floor in a dormitory. And one of the individuals on the floor, every time he drank gin, he would go crazy. I mean, nutty and violent. My goodness. One time he tore off a railing and he jammed it through a window, one of those windows with the wires in them. It's a double paned window and it's got the wires in between. Anyway, he jammed that thing in there. Of course, he had to pay for it later. So we begged his roommate to please don't let him drink gin. And of course, that was his job for the rest of the semester. It only happened one other time. We were afraid that, something horrible would happen, worse than tearing the railing off and jamming it through a window that was supposed to be impermeable. Glycine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's also an amino acid. Yeah, it's also an amino acid. It's found in the brainstem and the spinal cord. It slows down your brain. It's prominent in protein synthesis. Glutamic acid, also glutamate and glutamine. are important excitatory neurotransmitters. They play a major role in cognition, motor function, sensory function, and reinforcing your memory. And these are precursors for GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid. The tachykinins, these are drugs, or these are neurotransmitters that tell you when you're in pain. The major tachykinin is substance P. You'd think the P stood for pain, but it doesn't. It stands for peptide. It conveys the pain message to the brain from the peripheral nervous system. Enkephalins will block substance P, and that's what your body does so that you can continue to function. That's why enkephalins are in there. Let's say that you're being chased by a bear, by a grizzly bear, and you trip and fall, and you sprain your ankle. Well, what do? Do you just lay there and let the bear eat you, or do you shake off the pain and start running again? Well, what enkephalins will do, it will allow you to shake off the pain and start running again. When I say shake off, what I'm really talking about is enkephalins getting into your system, blocking the substance P, and then you can run. And of course, you're running and running and running. You run as fast as you can. You make it to a place of safety, and then all of a sudden your leg starts hurting again. That's the way it works. We see this in football players. They'll dislocate something or they'll break something. They'll play the rest of the game, and then all of a sudden they discover that they have an injury. The adrenaline, the natural painkillers, besides the adrenaline, are blocking the pain, and that's how they're able to function. Anandamide has an affinity for the receptor sites that accommodate THC. They're found in the limbic system, integration of sensory experiences with emotion. So if you think about people when they're smoking pot, how do they act? Well, they act kind of goofy, don't they? Everything's funny. So yes, anandamide has something to do with emotions. It controls learning, motor coordination, and memory. What happens when you smoke pot? One of the things that happens is you can't remember anything. You can't remember from the beginning of a sentence to the end of the sentence. And of course, that's what anandamide does. It supports your memory. If you're utilizing these receptor sites with anandamide rather than THC, now your short-term memory is intact. But of course, if you're smoking pot, your short-term memory is impaired. And it acts as an analgesic. And of course, when THC inhabits these receptor sites, it takes away their pain. And this is one of the reasons why the people that want to legalize marijuana are saying, we need this stuff, we got to have this stuff. It's otherwise I've been in chronic pain for all my life, that kind of thing. Anyway, anandamide acts as an analgesic, as does THC. Corticotropin tells the adrenal glands to produce ACTH. I think that's right. ACTH tells, wait a minute. Corticotropin comes from the pituitary gland. Corticotropin tells something to produce ACTH. The ACTH tells the adrenal gland to produce cortisone. It aids in the immune system, it helps healing, and it is part of stress control. Nitric oxide is the newest neurotransmitter that we've discovered. It was discovered in 1992. We weren't exactly sure what was going on. Nitric oxide, of course, is nitrous oxide, is laughing gas. We discovered nitric oxide, and then we discovered a chemical that actually works on the nitrous oxide, that chemical is Viagra. Viagra works by blocking nitric oxide. It is necessary for the erectile function of the penis. What happens is nitric oxide actually, men would walk around with erect penises all the time if it weren't for nitric oxide. Nitric oxide blocks the erectile function of the penis. And Viagra blocks the nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is really important. It would be very embarrassing if men were walking around with erect penises all the time. Anyway, so nitric oxide is what actually blocks the erectile functioning of the penis. And Viagra blocks the nitric oxide. It helps regulate your emotions. In too large dosages, it can cause cancer and vascular collapse. And that is that. We're going to stop right here. And the reason we're going to stop is because we're going to finish that. We're going to finish the rest of the chapter next week. This is a monster chapter. So we'll finish it next week, okay? So I'll talk to you guys next week. I'll finish this chapter next week. Stay safe, and if you have any questions, my office hours, my Zoom office hours, are on the website. Just click on the where it says office hours, and you'll go directly to me. I should be available if I'm not doing something silly. So anyway, I'll see you guys next week.